This week, Emmet and I begin a journey through Jack Kirby's Fourth World saga, the wild stories he wrote and drew for DC Comics in the early 70s. We begin with the first part of his run on Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, including the overload of new concepts, places, and characters, some ways in which one might miss Stan Lee's touch, and what the heck is comedian Don Rickles doing in this book? First, if you appreciate the work we do on this show and the other Deconstructing Comics shows, we'd love it if you'd support us at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, Emmet out in Kangaroo Country. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Tim. Now, as folks who have listened to the show before, may have heard me talk about the ongoing conflict with the native kangaroos in the area.
I think the last time we talked about it, they had kind of run away.
And recently, I don't know when the episode will actually air, if you like, or drop on this podcast, but Kumar came out to visit me here.
Oh.
And we recorded an episode, maybe two. And he was asking about the kangaroos. Where are these kangaroos? Where is this evidence of dirty protest by kangaroos? Well, Kumar, thank you for cursing me, because within days, it's kicked off again.
Did somebody say kangaroos? Here we are.
Yes, here we are. Let's get to it, lads. Form a line. And, I
restroom break.
This morning. It's a bit like freshman break. They've gone a bit hog wild.
Well, it's a restroom break.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
they couldn't find the local bathroom.
Or maybe it's not a break, it's their job now.
But yes, hostilities have once again recommenced.
Oh, dear. Okay. Well, so why are we here today? So, of course, Emmet and I, we have discussed on the show several bios and autobios of Stan Lee. And then we talked about Tom Scioli's bio of Jack Kirby. And after reading that, I expressed interest in reading Kirby's Fourth World saga. So we decided to jump into that, probably do it in bits and pieces over who knows how long. But for this one, well, we're just getting started mostly with Jimmy Olsen stuff. I found a reading order on comicbookreadingorders.com, which it's not like the order that they chronologically came out in necessarily, but I think this will make for a better podcast. I did find another one where it was like the first 3 issues of Jimmy Olsen and then like rotating around the 4 books, probably the actual chronology that they came out. But what we're going to be talking about today is Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. Well, the idea was to read 133 through 139 and then the Forever People #1. But I found as I was reading it that Jimmy Olsen 139 is mid-story. And one thing I was scratching my head about was what happened to issue 140. 140, turns out, was a giant-size reprint issue.
Right.
So it has nothing to do with the Fourth World. So the next part of that story is in 141, which I went ahead and read. So 133 through 139 and 141 and Forever People #1.
Yes, and it's a bit all around the shop. It's a bit confusing, and I'm just going to jump in now at this point. I'm probably going to mention Grant Morrison's Seven Soldiers of Victory a bunch of times because there's so many points of connection.
Are you going to mention Alan Moore? Is we going to get the usual mention in?
I'm biting my tongue to not do that this time. I'm biting my tongue. Grant Morrison, they clearly were looking to create a tribute to Kirby with Seven Soldiers, and I hadn't appreciated when I read Grant Morrison's Seven Soldiers how much of the stuff that they introduced was just a slight reformulation of what Kirby did, because Seven Soldiers Victory, is quite a trippy book, quite a strange series of mini-series interlinked. And just as you described, one issue of one book will then lead into one issue of another book. There'll be a sort of a shared location, or you'll see a background appearance of a character from the previous book. And they seem to take Kirby's approach here and then just really drill down on it. Mm-hmm. I find that fascinating, not just in terms of the release schedule of Seven Soldiers in comparison to, as you say, this introduction of the new gods and the Fourth World saga, but also the concepts of like the Newsboy Legion and the Guardian. All that stuff is here. Kirby did that. That was not Morrison inventing from whole cloth these sort of deconstructions. Kirby's already done it decades before. And yeah, I can only just put my hand up and go, forgive my ignorance. I didn't realize just how much Kirby had set in motion, and potentially no one else outside of Morrison looked at and went, oh, I'll have that.
Okay. Yeah, well, actually, he reintroduces characters that he and Joe Simon created in the 40s, the Newsboy Legion and the Golden Guardian, who I think had not been seen since the 40s when this came out in 1970.
Yeah, and it's like Jimmy Olsen, the book, as such, the series, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, is like a staging ground all of a sudden for all these Kirby creations. Mm-hmm. And, the other thing I point as well is that I think Kirby has a sense of who Jimmy Olsen is, that a lot of contemporary writers who followed on from Kirby, so writers in the 80s and onwards, saw Olsen, saw the preppy way he's dressed, saw his bow tie, saw all that kind of thing, and went, oh, he's a nerdy little nebbishy kid, And he's not. He's a hustler.
Yeah, that's for sure.
He's out, he's chasing stories, he's getting amongst, he's a bit of a delinquent, and Kirby knows that because Kirby's from that period and he understands what that fashion sense indicates. It's an aspirational form of dress as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think Kirby gets Olsen and then decides to use Olsen as I said, staging ground for all these other weird stuff, which is very future looking. It's very much Kirby looking forward. It's not Kirby trying to restage his adolescence. It's Kirby trying to say, okay, well, what are kids into now? Let's try and throw some of these concepts at them.
Well, I did a little research into the background of this, and I found an article on vulture.com written by our old friend Abraham Riesman.
Oh, dear.
And talking about his time at DC when he moved over there in the 70s. Well, and I had seen this somewhere before, that the idea of the new gods came from a Thor story that he did with Stan, although, of course, Kirby was, actually writing it, where Asgard was destroyed, and Kirby wanted to have all of those gods replaced by a new set of young gods, but he decided Marvel wasn't treating him well enough for him to just hand over all these characters he'd created. And then once Carmen Infantino talked him into moving over to DC with at least somewhat more creative freedom, then he to introduce them over there. And so the deal was that he would do these 3 original books, plus they wanted him to take over an existing book. And he's like, I don't want to toss somebody else off of their job. But Jimmy Olsen didn't have a regular creative team. just been kind of whoever was handy. So he took over the Jimmy Olsen book. So that's why it happened to be that one. Because it's when I found out that the whole thing started in Jimmy Olsen, I'm like, Jimmy Olsen, why there of all places?
Yeah, but it's interesting as well because Superman is so strongly associated with the fourth world, and particularly in recent years. And I always pushed back against that because I was going, oh no, Kirby's mythology was self-contained. It was, he wanted to tell this story. Bringing Darkseid in as Superman's nemesis is a betrayal of the character, blah, 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 blah. And then you look at this, and no, this is where it all starts. This is where it all starts.
Superman's all over the place in these books,
Yeah.
including Forever People #1. He seems like the main character in that book.
Exactly. But the difference with this book is that I really like the approach he takes because Jimmy Olsen is the principal character. And Superman is like a force of nature. He moves the plot along. He clearly acts, but Jimmy Olsen's there, and I think there's a bit of tension between them as well because Olsen wants to go his own way. He wants to do his own thing. He doesn't necessarily want to be just following after Superman the entire time. And I feel like Superman's just a strange fact of Olsen's life that he's learned to adapt to, and he's almost. He's overly familiar with Superman now, and now he's onto other weirder stories. And I like that a lot. I like that idea that Superman is just one of the extraordinary things that's in Olsen's life. He's a weirdness magnet, He's just, which is a good trait for a journalist. But I think it's a perspective on the DC that Kirby singularly gets. I'm repeating myself. I know I've said this on this podcast before, but I've never gotten over the idea of what it must be like to live in one of these cities where you've got these alien invasions and subterranean creatures coming out of the sewers and men in capes fighting in the sky and all this kind of stuff. Like, what does that do to you? What does it do to your property values?
Why does anyone still live in that town?
Exactly. And in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, you kind of get a sense of why you would, because you kind of see through Olsen that this is exciting, and you need to adapt, but you need to survive. Olsen has those traits, and I find him much more interesting here than I have in numerous of other appearances.
Right. Well, he and the newsboys get kind of resentful of Superman if Superman leaves them out of the action.
Yeah, they get pretty broken up about it.
I mean, he just saved their lives, but they don't care. They wanted action, and they just had to kind of sit around while he was doing all the work.
Yeah, which is a great idea. I love that point. I love that idea that, they're going, but we also have super science on our sides. We can do things.
Now, as Riesman mentions, and I think you had mentioned it to me also, that DC didn't like the way Kirby was drawing the faces of Superman and Jimmy Olsen and had someone else come in and redraw them. I couldn't tell by looking at it.
Is this Vince Coletta?
Well, he was the inker. I don't know who was redrawing the faces.
Right. I don't know myself. I saw some YouTube video I didn't actually watch the video, so maybe, folks, this is a wasted anecdote, but I saw some YouTube video where it was like Vince Coletta, the artist who ruined Kirby, kind of thing. So I wonder if that's that, somebody coming in and sort of ironing out those granite-like features that Kirby introduces all the time.
And Mark Evanier, who was an assistant to Kirby, tells Riesman that he thinks Kirby started getting frustrated with DC around day 2.
Oh my God.
And part of it was the faces, but also, now, I think Kirby was a little naive to think this, but his idea was that, well, as Riesman says, he would craft the first few stories, introduce his bevy of characters and notions, and then hand the titles off to Evanier, Sherman, and other creators to write and draw, with Kirby acting as an artistic overseer. But of course, from DC's perspective, they got Jack Kirby. They want Jack Kirby, not people working for Jack Kirby. And they were kind of breathing down his neck to keep introducing, new ideas, new characters that they could then continue to use within the DC universe. And so, you see that in these issues where it's just constantly, well, as Riesman says, many new proper nouns of places and characters and concepts, and it's really overload.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. And then there's these little interstitial stories as well. Like new concepts, new characters just being dropped into almost like an anthology at times, little moments, little cutaways. And I think it's great. But it's fascinating what you've just said, because again, like in the Grant Morrison Seven Soldiers book, you see somebody trying to pull the same thing again, where Morrison created all these concepts, or brush them off and reintroduce them with a new lick of paint. And then apparently their idea was, okay, somebody else come in and use these characters, right? Which, of course, didn't happen. One or two slight exceptions. The Frankenstein character came back, but I think most of them just got left on the cutting room floor.
Well, and like with this, the main thing that got kept was Darkseid.
Yes.
I mean, my first introduction to Darkseid was in Teen Titans in the 80s. Because, at the time, the new Teen Titans with Wolfman and Perez was kind of a hot book. And so my brother and I tried it for a while, and it was at a point where Darkseid was in the book. Although we didn't know how to pronounce it. We were calling him Darkseid.
Yeah.
It was much more recently that I learned that it was supposed to be Darkseid. And, that's kind of one of Kirby's naming strategies, is to come up with a word that describes the character and then spell it differently. Or like Apocalypse, where he lives, that's spelled like it has to do with your lips. What?
But again, it's the idea of picking at the corpse that's left out in the open. Vultures picking up the corpse. You can see that in the 90s. You can see that with the Image generation. You can see all these other creators like introducing Y's instead of I's. Jeff Loeb was a devil for this. Was it Risk? I always bring up this example. There's a character in X-Force called Risk. How would you spell Risk there, Tim?
I suppose it's RYSK.
No, close. Or IS. We're safe so far. QUE. Which, I believe is Risk in another language, potentially. But yeah, just why would you do that? They were copying Kirby.
Yeah. Briefly, as we get into the story, we've got this Morgan Edge character who is from Galaxy Broadcasting. He's the president of that company, and they've taken over the Daily Planet. Just happened to take over the newspaper where Superman works. Funny coincidence. And he has sent Jimmy and the Newsboy Legion on a mission to a place called the Wild Area, which, I don't know. One point of this that I kind of missed Stan Lee was that Stan Lee was better at naming things and naming people. I don't know, the Wild Area just doesn't sound very enticing to me as a name for a place.
It's kind of German philosopher naming convention, you just have definite article, noun. And I do like it though. I think it's quite stripped back. As you say, you don't have the flowery Shakespearean purple prose of Stan Lee. You simply have the thing.
I think area is too technical of a word. Like wild land or something would be better. But
wild zone.
Yeah.
I can see that. But I also kind of like it because he's trying to introduce this. So there's a perspective on hippies and 60s and the loved up generation and all this stuff that's happening here that Kirby's clearly, as I said before, he's not looking backward. He's trying to look forward. He's trying to see what's going on around him, and he's trying to fold that into his sort of future oriented fantasies. And I can see this being like Kirby hearing about something like a happening, or a be in. These hippie conventions, and going, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that too. I'll take these sort of basic verb adjectival forms and use those. I find it charming, frankly. And
you're talking about the kind of the Harrys, the kind of
the
hippie
Harrys,
groups.
Yeah. All different naming conventions, as we said. And I hadn't read these before, as you've mentioned. I hadn't read Superman's biology Olsen. But I'd read a lot about Kirby. And particularly coming up, I'd read, comics critics who would be maybe 10 years my senior back in the 90s, early 2000s, talking about Kirby this era, as you say, post Stan Lee, in a very dismissive way. And one of the ways they talk about him dismissively is that, oh, here's this old man trying to get down with the kids, and it's embarrassing, right? And I could disagree more, because what I'm seeing here is utter sincerity. I think when we look at the Stan Lee stuff, you can see somebody trying to get down with the kids and trying to borrow the lingo, but not quite getting it. With Kirby, I don't think he's borrowing. He's taking inspiration from what he's seeing, and then he's going his own way with it. And what I'm seeing with these characters and the forever people and the genetically engineered beings that we find in the wild area, I'm seeing hopefulness. I'm seeing this idea of, well, maybe these kids are going to turn out all right. Maybe there's a fundamental change in the character of young people that I'm seeing out in the streets. And what could this lead to in the future? Now, what we know is it doesn't lead to much because there's a great crackdown in the 80s and the culture wars and blah, blah, blah. And, greed is good. But for a brief period of time, there was a sense that, we could be going down a different path. We could be, we could be Paris 1968 revolutionary types. Let's change the world. And I think that's sincere. I don't think there's anything cynical about these depictions of this. I think if somebody today was to do it, it would be cynical. Number one, they'd be looking backward. They wouldn't be taking account of what's happening in the world today. And number two, they would be trying to not be embarrassed by what they'd written after the fact. The fact that people say Kirby was embarrassing for serving this up, I think is just a failure of imagination.
Well, I would be curious to know how actual hippies in 1970 would have felt about these books. I mean, if they would have thought that it was an old guy just trying to get hip with the kids, or if it was something that would appeal to them.
I think it wasn't. I think there was a reputation that, people in head shops were reading Kirby comics, that the New Gods was seen as a strange book, but not enough people were reading it. I think that was the issue, that they assumed, the publisher assumed that, if you start talking about telling these stories with these kind of concepts, they'll come running. But they were they weren't marketing to that audience, really. And as we talked about before, if you want to look at marketing, the person who's really good at marketing themselves at college campuses was Stan Lee. And later on, you have people coming after Kirby who are borrowing from Kirby, but they are very good. They are very good at sort of capturing that college campus. Let's drop some acid and look at swirly colors.
Well,
I'm thinking of Jim Starlin in particular.
Yeah. I was reading this and thinking, I didn't know Kirby did LSD because I couldn't explain any other way some of the stuff in this series.
No, he just has this amazing imagination. I don't think he touched anything.
No, I don't think so either, but it's just like, how can you get this trippy while you're not on anything? And he's got, so many of these pages with these kind of black and white weird collages.
They're beautiful. When Superman's pointing to that collage of the human genome, wow, that just page just comes in out of nowhere. I thought, this is incredible. How expensive is this page? How much did that page cost to do? That was my other question.
Yeah, I mean, I just wasn't sure what to say about those pages because, except I was wondering why they were in black and white. Would it have been too expensive to do them in color, or would the printing process have killed them? Like, it wouldn't have made any sense?
Yeah, I do think there's a reproduction issue. Here's your Alan Moore reference. Like there's the issue of Providence where they have a page which is a painting that a character has done, and for that page they actually staged a photo shoot with people in costume as monsters, tearing this Irish cop apart, and they actually did a photo shoot and they actually included it in the comic, and Moore famously said it's the most expensive comic ever made because all the money went into just doing that, getting that shot for that one page in that comic. So yeah, I think just for reasons of reproduction is why it's black and white and a bit faded.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a beautiful sort of the use of collage again is Kirby sort of trying to move this forward a bit. Like, let's engage some crazy ideas. Let's talk about evolution. Let's talk about cloning. Let's talk about genetics.
Right. There's a lot of stuff in this that exists now, but it's total sci-fi in 1970. Yeah, mapping the genome and cloning and voice recognition technology. There's a place where they're in the project that's called The Project, and Superman, it recognizes Superman's voice. He has to speak into this microphone for it to identify him. So Jack's thinking ahead here. He's imagining things that would happen.
Yeah, and there's something also where if you're going to use a character like Superman, who has in himself the ability to solve all of the world's problems in a day. This is a guy who can create a diamond from a lump of coal in the movies, but also he's somebody he's got super speed, he can travel around the world really fast, he's got super strength, he could do all these incredible feats, he could construct amazing structures for people who are unhoused, he could do all these things. He doesn't, though. He doesn't do anything to alter the world. He doesn't do anything to improve the lot of the vast majority of mankind. That's why they need to keep introducing alien invaders, because that's fine. He can deal with those. But you can't let Superman change the world. And it's a tension that exists within the comics that becomes increasingly ridiculous. And Kirby answers that problem by introducing things within the world that are equally ridiculous. And Superman's maybe familiar with them. He's an alien from Krypton. He has some understanding of these things, but he's at least able to interact with them on a more equal footing. Hence the fourth world. Hence all the wild area, all the stuff that goes on there. It's somewhere where Superman is actually not entirely outclassing everything and having to be a bit provincial in his activity. I really like that as approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then in Forever People 1, so a friend of Jimmy's meets some of the Forever People who have come to Earth for some reason and takes some photos, including a photo down a boom tube, which is the way that they travel interdimensionally. And when Jimmy shows Clark one of the photo of the boom tube, with his vision, he can see the tiny, tiny spot in the middle that is the city at the other end of the boom tube. This, what is it, Supertown?
Supertown, yeah, where the Forever People are from.
And he seems to recognize it. Or at one point, as he's thinking to himself as Superman, he says that it's Superman's dream, and he wants to go there.
Yeah.
And he almost does, and then he realizes that he needs to stay on Earth because Darkseid has arrived and Earth is in danger. But yeah, that was interesting to me that there's something that's intriguing to him about these things that Kirby is introducing and the where these people came from.
Yeah, you're right. His desire to go to Supertown, he has this desperate need to belong to this other place. And the Forever People kids are going, no, your responsibility is to stay here. We're staying here. We're trying to solve this mess. Mm-hmm. The Darkseid's called, you need to help us, or you need to help your people. But he's like, no, I want to go there. And there's something quite human about that moment where he abandons his duty briefly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he does the right thing, but he has to give it some thought first, which isn't the stereotype of Superman. It's he always immediately does the right thing.
Yeah, Yeah, and there was some quote I saw recently, attributed to Dan Didio, I believe, where he had made approaches to Garth Ennis to write Superman. And the story goes, he wanted Ennis on the book because he felt Ennis would, in his own way, tell stories that would challenge the concept of Superman, because he feels creators generally, when they get on the book, they write the Superman that they remember when they were 5. Or they turn into 5-year-olds. I think he's implying they write childlike stories because they've become childlike. They're thinking about this idea of Superman from when they were kids. And he wanted somebody to come in and move it forward. And he thought of Ennis, and Ennis turned him down. I find that interesting because Didio also has a lot of time for this period of Kirby. Like, he keeps trying to, or he's long since gone. But he kept trying to reintroduce Kirby concepts from the 70s at DC. And I do think he had a sense of what Kirby was doing. Does he recognize that Kirby was writing a Superman who wasn't this 5-year-old's dream? Like, this was an attempt to move the concept incrementally into the future.
Coming up, the story's great swings in tone, just what Don Rickles is doing here, and more. Don't forget you can help to unlock classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics, help me return all the old episodes to this podcast feed, get videos of my brother Paul and me discussing 20th century TV trivia, and at the $4 level, get access to hours of additional full-length podcasts. At the $10 level, you can review the book of your choice with me here on this show. Support Deconstructing Comics and our other shows at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can send a one-time donation via PayPal to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
I crave superheroic content. Let's see what's on.
I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Nah, I don't think so.
I'm Batman.
Not really what I'm looking for.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Ugh, absolutely not.
This is Robin the Boy Wonder. I'm Batman.
Aha, now that's more like it.
If you see Adam West as the one true Batman, then this is the podcast for you. Tune in every other Thursday on your favorite podcast source to hear Tim and Paul discuss the 1966 series and everything connected with it. What's the podcast called?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
One thing to me about these books, I found... So, a lot of it, the tone is this really, like, there's evil out there and it's really threatening and it's dangerous and you got motorcycle gangs. And then mixed in with that, you've got these goofy jokes and the Newsboy Legion walking around with their old New York accents. And I just found the swings in tone kind of, I don't know, I was throwing me off. Like, well, what is the tone of this supposed to be? Is it goofy comedy or is it like really serious, kind of over the top stuff? I mean, it just kind of kept swinging back and forth.
Yeah, and like you mentioned Newsboy Legion a few times, and we sort of, I don't know if we've addressed this yet, but like it's the kids of the original Newsboy Legion.
Yeah.
But then we meet the original Newsboy Legion, and
they're their fathers. Mm-hmm.
They have formed a think tank of sorts. They are the men behind the curtain. They understand all the things that are happening, and it's very serious. But then we cut back to all the jokey patter and the different stereotypes the kids are representing. It's a bit breakneck. But I don't mind it so much because I think, any comic which is impressed with itself to the point where it's just deadly serious all the time isn't a fun comic to read. And comics are comical. Comics need to have humor in them. So I think maybe it's slightly unbalanced, the mix, but it's it does keep reminding you, hey, we're all here to have some fun. Let's throw some crazy concepts at you. Let's talk about genetic engineering. But then let's have a rubbery-faced kid, shout about how he wants to have a fight with an evil god.
and then let's have Don Rickles show up.
That's Don Rickles. Let's get him in here.
In 139, we meet Don Rickles' lookalike, Goody Rickles, but in Rickles spelled with an E-L rather than L-E. And then Don himself shows up in 141. Again, 140 was a reprint issue. And I mean, I'm not sure how they went about writing him, if he wrote his own material or if Jack wrote Rickles or how that worked, but sounds like Rickles. And I assume that this was something that Rickles himself was on board with to be in this comic. I mean, DC at the time was doing a lot of comics that had real life comedians in them for some reason. They had a whole Jerry Lewis series that went on for years. I think Bob Hope showed up in something or other. But I was wondering, was this Jack's idea or was this something that DC stuck him with? I was just wondering what was going on behind the scenes with these Rickles issues.
Yeah, so I'm looking at Mark Evanier's blog, and he's written a post where he's saying, you guys keep asking me about this, so I'm going to tell the story one more time.
Okay.
So I think Evanier says the most famous plotline in Jimmy Olsen was probably a two-parter that guest starred insult comedian Don Rickles. The event had originated with a suggestion from Steve Sherman and myself, so Evanier, that Rickles, who boasted he never picked on a little guy, only on the biggies, make a brief cameo and insult Superman. After all, who was a bigger biggie than Superman? Jack liked the idea, and permission was procured from Rickles via his publicist for what was then planned as a sequence of but a page or two. At Jack's request, Steve and I wrote a batch of suggested Rickles lines. One went like this: Rickles, hey, where are you from, big boy? Superman, I'm from the planet Krypton. Rickles, just my luck. I got insults for every nationality on the planet. I got to run into a yo-yo from Krypton. And he goes on to say that DC's publicist then asked Kirby to go on to do 2 whole issues with Rickles.
Yeah.
On the cover as well. Feature him on the cover. I'll send you the link for this so you can include it in the notes for the episode.
Yeah, photo of Rickles on the cover of both issues.
Oh, here we go. Here's Stinger. Years later, in an appearance on Conan O'Brien's NBC talk show, Rickles was less than delighted when the host hauled out a copy of the comic book and asked him about it. Put that away, he said, I had nothing to do with that. There's the postscript.
I see. Okay.
So it looks like it was just a big publicity gimmick.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Also, Riesman mentioned that Kirby had ambitions that the Fourth World would be like a series of graphic novels on the model of Lord of the Rings, like a whole, series of like big books that were graphic novels and telling the serialized story. And then, of course, it never got to that point. But I mean, he had ambitions for the medium. He could kind of see what comics could be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, arguably, that is what the Hunger Dogs is. Like,
when he came back, and he came back briefly in '84 to try to finish up the story after it had been unceremoniously canceled a few years into the run.
Yeah, and it's very much a cap to the whole myth. Like, this is the end. And from what I can remember from our reading on Kirby, he was getting pushback from DC where they're saying, this is too depressing. Everybody's dying. And he's going, yes, but this is Ragnarok. This is the end. This is the point. So he was getting, they sort of belatedly realized the idea of having a sort of oversized graphic novel epic. The thing he'd imagined, as you say, he delivers it, and then they're asking him to tone it down because they want it to be what they feel is more commercial, which is like a Star Wars, very entertaining, very lighthearted, bit of daring do, bit of comedy. bit of drama, mix it all up in a package, send it out into the world. And Kirby's like, no, this is all Sturm and Drang. This is Darkseid and Highfather at each other's throats, and Orion has to get his licks in, and all this kind of stuff. The anti-life equations finally revealed. Yeah, all this. It's fascinating to just see him go, I'm going to just do all the things I wanted to do. There's something quite stubborn about it, bloody-minded almost. I'm just going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I saw, I think it was in the same article that DC kept bugging him for more concepts, and he came up with Commandy and another one, Demon, I think. And when DC saw those, they liked them so much that they put the New Gods books on. They suspended them all, and it was. Yeah, Evanier says it seemed to be the worst day of Jack's life that he had ever seen. So,
yeah, like he's just trying to pump out ideas, but like don't like mix and match what he can do. I have a lot of sympathy for him because I feel as if he was, this idea machine, and I would agree that maybe not the best self-promoter, not the best, not able to sell himself, and I don't see that necessarily as a failing, but I think there's a lot of creators now who are very good at self-promotion, very good at selling the work they have to be, considering the way the existence of the market today, but the breadth of conception, I think, is much narrower now. And maybe, that's a sweeping over generalization. Comics is a huge market. There's so many different avenues. There's particular comics work coming out from all these different nooks and crannies that have nothing to do with the mainstream. I accept that. I accept there's other cultures. I accept there's other traditions of comics that, just do whatever they need to do. But just from this perspective of somebody who's grown up in American comics and looking at the lay of the land, it can be a bit, thin gruel out there at times. Mm-hmm. You do need to go to the more independent areas to find something challenging. I think that's a fair statement. Mm-hmm. More and more, the mainstream is starting to bring in some of these people and try to give them free rein to do something interesting within the bounds of IP, the limits of something commercially viable. But Kirby was maybe one of the people back in the day who could do all of those things. He could create all these concepts and just move on to the next one. But his ethics were getting in the way. As a storyteller and as somebody who was looking at his window at the state of the world and going, well, this isn't good.
Yeah. I was wishing that, I don't know, these new characters are gods, but and they all talk so seriously, and that can be a little bit of a difficult read. It would have been nice for them to be a little bit more human. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but also bear in mind there are issues with titles like Brigadoom. So, there's some silliness at work too.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. Like, he's doing this sort of mock mythical approach to these characters. Mm-hmm. And that's as much a confusion of what mythology actually is. I think the versions of the myths that we've received, that have been passed down to us, translated and rewritten, and tend to be quite neutered. And then you actually go reading the original myths, and they're so, oh my god. the example I always dig up is from Irish mythology, where the warrior Cuchulainn had he could shapeshift. He could, when he was when the blood rage took him, his body would warp, like he'd become massive. And one of the stories describes his testicles growing so large they're smacking on the ground as he rides a chariot. Like pure toilet humor.
Yeah.
But like, that's not a myth like Cuchulainn I read in my school textbook.
No.
And I feel as if some of the traditions of myth that Kirby's like touching on are maybe a little too refined. Mm-hmm. You know.
Well, I mean, Thor used to be done that way too, except, I don't know, at least the way Stan wrote it, you kind of keep you going along, because he just kind of do it over the top with the language and the Carnival Barker stuff, and
breaking the fourth wall as well.
And Kirby's just not quite, at least in these issues. I mean, I feel like it sort of comes across as Stan light in terms of his sort of cover blurbs and his narration and the dialogue.
Yeah, definitely the cover blurbs. Definitely, there's a tradition there that they're trying to continue, and there's a tone of voice there that Lee's introduced that they're trying to maintain. Mm-hmm. And to Kirby's detriment, because you say he doesn't speak that language.
Yeah,
he's not the Carnival Barker. He's not trying to jive it up all the time. He's trying to entertain, but also engage. I think he's more thoughtful. Mm-hmm. And that's not always an advantage to somebody trying to catch the eye of the kid at the spinner rack, Mm-hmm. But certainly that was the attitude of the publishers towards Kirby when he came to DC, and they had this scalp. They'd stolen him from Marvel, and then a couple of issues in, all of a sudden there's tensions, and there's like, oh, do it different. Oh, do more of this. Don't do less of this. Oh, maybe do different. Oh, why isn't Superman in the story? Which then again happened to him when he went back to Marvel with the Eternals, which I don't know if we're ever going to go into the Eternals, but then you suddenly have Eternal stories. Eternals is very much in the same vein as New Gods, but you suddenly have Eternal stories where the Hulk is showing up and similar situations at work there. This needs to be more relatable to the fans who expect a certain kind of story. They expect to see certain characters. They need to be in this story. I feel like you straitjacketed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're within this corporate comics universe, and so you have to play by the rules of that kind of comic. But I mean, if he didn't do that, then it would be hard to get any notice at all. But in the comics environment of those days, I think.
That's it. There's something I noticed just quickly on the Forever People. I know we've been jumping around a lot, but I feel like there's a sense of how much there is to get into here with the early Fourth World stuff. There is a character in Forever People called Beautiful Dreamer, right? There is also a character in X-Men, one of the Morlocks, called Beautiful Dreamer. And there was another character, I think later in X-Men, I want to say again, I think it was one of the Neo or something. There was these characters that came in 2 decades later, also called Beautiful Dreamer. So I did some quick Googling. I couldn't find anything definitive. Why this name keeps reoccurring?
Well, there was a song.
Right. So that's it? They will just...
I guess.
Okay.
Everybody's just like, they're thinking, I have a character who's beautiful and she dreams. Okay. We'll use the song title as her name.
Okay, is that it? And that was contemporaneous with Forever People?
Well, Beautiful Dreamer the song is quite a bit older. I think it would have been one that, from Jack's younger days.
Right. Okay. Because I did wonder that, was it a bunch of other writers? Like, I want to say it was either Claremont or Louise Simonson. I'm not sure which one it was who did the second Beautiful Dreamer, the Morlock.
Oh, sorry. It goes back much further than I thought. It was written by Stephen Foster in 1864.
Oh my God. Okay.
So it's a real classic. It predates Jack.
By quite a bit. But like, what's going on with? I just don't understand that. Like, I don't quite follow what that is, because particularly with comics, that's a very narrow band. I mean, you're talking about a tradition that's very claustrophobic. Everyone's aware of what everyone else is doing. If you're going to name a character the same name as another character by a rival publisher, people will know. There's only so many names going around.
Speaking of which, so we've got a group in this called the Outsiders, and I don't think it's the same Outsiders that Batman teamed up with later.
Yes.
And the same publisher.
Was there a biker movie called The Outsiders?
Ooh, okay.
Because I know you've got the S.E. Hinton novel, and then that was made into a film in 1983. But I was wondering, was there another Outsiders before that?
The novel is from 1967.
Right.
And there was a movie of it in 83. Just
83,
Googling here. Yeah.
I've read S.E. Hinton. I've read some of her stuff after The Outsiders as well. And she's a big fan of Supernatural, apparently, the show Supernatural. So there's all these photos of her meeting the cast of Supernatural, which is kind of cute. But The Outsiders, I associate that with youth gangs and delinquents and bikers and kind of stuff like that. So I can see Kirby latching onto that too.
Yeah.
He's not like at a remove from popular culture. Like, he's definitely channeling whatever was showing at the theater down the road.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. Well, so far so good. We'll be coming back to this before too long, and I guess if we're following that same reading order, we'll be reading more Jimmy Olsen and then jumping on to some of the other 3 books.
I can't wait to get to the Vampire Planet. That concept, it's this famous joke that Kirby came up with, a planet of vampires, and the planet has horns. Transylvane, I think it's called. So it's this joke,
Yeah, I guess
Kirby,
that's the very next issue, 142.
Yeah, exactly. And can you be more goth than Jack Kirby? It's a meme now. It's a meme I've seen out there, and I just, again, like the sheer invention of that, like, just is hilarious.
Yeah, it was hard to hold him back when he was going to get recognized for his writing, and he didn't have somebody else taking all the credit there, and he just kind of went crazy.
Yeah, like uncorked.
Yeah. Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen is published by DC Comics. You can help Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and all our podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. We're planning a Critiquing Comics for next week. Adam will be here to help me discuss Bric-a-Brac #1 by Ryan Hack, Raphael Sam, and Tobin Resical. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.